Okay, so welcome back to 23 Degrees Sideways. Let's start with the history of mask wearing. The mask thing as a social movement, as everyone must wear a mask, with the little cartoons and all the ads and the public health announcements, actually did not start with the Spanish flu, the trench flu. Okay, I don't know why they call it Spanish flu. It's lost in the politics of history, and I'm not going to go there. I understand what went on, but it's the trench flu. It's the World War I trench flu. It's not even trench flu, it's the massive amounts of humanity moving in enclosed spaces flu. That's a really key element. It's one of those things that people refuse to consider. What made the Spanish flu so bad was pretty much identical to modern urbanization. Probably actually what made the flu happen. Okay, back up. The masks did not start with the Spanish flu. The masks started with the Mongolian plague. There was a plague outbreak. And the plague outbreak, even despite the fact that we, at this point in time, understand disease transmission and basic bacteriology, despite all that, how do you get plague? How is plague spread? Do you know? It's pretty much common knowledge. This is third grade stuff. I learned it in third grade, literally third grade, okay? Plague rats, all right? Rats and fleas, rats and fleas, it's a vermin spread disease. Mask wearing for the plague outbreak became a big deal, and it was a social conformity and social behavior issue. No basis in any medicine at all. You don't get the plague from people breathing on the window. Okay? That's where it starts. So, Dan says that I'm, at some point in this, that I'm challenging his assumptions. I am challenging his assumptions, but I need to know where your assumptions come from. I know where your assumptions come from. I need to know where you think they come from. Because they come from a totally faked social behavior, fear, assuaging of fear, okay? That's what it was. Assuaging of fear in the populace, wearing masks for plague. That's where it actually starts, okay? We'll get into the surgery in a moment. But that's where your masks start. Never worked. After the Spanish flu, when we first started getting the research studies, that's when they changed it from you're protecting others to it's protecting you, because there was no data for you're protecting others. There was no data. Let me rephrase that. There was significant data that it didn't do anything. That's actually proof that it does not work, which is what Dan gets into next, okay? Dan says, I have an interesting take. And it's a fair point that there's, lack of social distancing and lack of hygiene when people wear a mask. But he doesn't see it as a problem. Now, he also says that too much emphasis is placed on lack of scientific evidence. We navigate the world with less rigorous lenses 99% of the time. Do you need science to tell you won't be infected if you never leave home? Whoa, common sense and deduction do the trick. Here's where common sense and deduction go very, very wrong. And then he says, now if I had affirmative evidence that masks don't work, that's another story. But what he's usually heard is that it would violate ethical norms to study it properly. That's actually not true. The type of study that he wants, the controlled, we're going to infect this population without masks and infect this population with masks, that would be unethical. However, we have lots and lots of studies, epidemiological studies and observational studies, lots and lots of epidemiological and observational studies, lots of studies that indicate that masks do nothing to prevent the spread of diseases in healthcare environments, especially. That's where you get the studies for the last century. Some of them are public social, societal studies, okay? But most of them are going to be in healthcare, where people are trained on how to do the mask wearing properly, how to wash their hands properly. The best you've got is some effect from people who self-report hand washing and mask wearing in a healthcare environment. But it's not significantly higher than the people who just report hand washing, and statistically it's a 0, but insofar as there's a little bit, you have to play with a confounder on conscientiousness, and that pretty much makes it go away. Masks alone, people who report masking but don't report extensive hand washing, no, nothing. Like literally nothing. People who report hand washing and mask wearing, very slight bump, but it's the same bump as people who just report hand washing. That's it. Masks, we have that's the best you've got for masks. That's the best hope you've got. Okay? It's nothing. Statistically, it's nothing. So I do have affirmative evidence that masks don't work. We have a century of data of affirmative evidence that masks don't work. That's why they're not studying mask disease transmission the way that they used to. They're studying things like aerosols out of dummy heads. Okay? They're trying to work with common sense deduction. And that brings us back to, if you never leave home, you won't be infected. That's not necessarily true either. Now, I know what he means, okay? We go back and forth about this a little bit. And what he means is, if you live in a box with a window and a door, you never open the window, you never open the door, and no one comes and sees you. You're alone, completely isolated, then you can't get it. Common sense. The problem with that common sense is that if you were to do that to a sample size of 100,000 people, about 1,000 of them would probably die of something resembling, indiscernible from, closely related to, or identical to the corona syndrome. Okay, that's a little difficult to come to terms with, because now you're dealing with stuff that looks like magic. You know, you are dealing with a virus. We don't really know all that much about virus behaviors. We know some. We know a lot more than we did 30, 40 years ago. But we don't know that much. And we don't know everything. And yeah, as long as you have airflow, something can happen. It's going to be the 1 in a million chance, but those things do happen. But this is a thought experiment that goes so extreme that you're not. What are you talking about? You're talking about trying to prove that masks work because if someone lives in a bubble, they wouldn't get a virus. There's no connection. Okay, there's no logic chain to this. It doesn't work. I'm just going to drop it now. But interesting example. The bike helmet is actually a much better example. Dan's going to get into why do surgeons wear masks? Are healthcare professionals as superstitious as the rest of us? The answer is yes, and I will tell you 2 words that prove that. Full moon. Absolutely. Medical professionals are as superstitious as the rest of us. Especially these so-called science-minded people who are extremely superstitious. Lots of faith-based. They don't challenge assumptions or presuppositions at all. Bike helmet is an interesting side note, though, because bike helmet is one of those analogies that really, really doesn't work, okay? I wear a bike helmet. I have a friend who doesn't wear a bike helmet. This is Dan. He says that there's no good evidence that bike helmets do anything. And I'm like, okay. The analogy doesn't work because bike helmets are not masks. First place, I know about the bike helmets, okay? Used to run a bike church. Help run a bike church. This wasn't a singular thing. They're community efforts. They're very, very, very collective. In fact, it got renamed Bike Collective because people were offended by the word church. Even though it's a historical thing because of a church that was empty in Santa Cruz that people took over to make a bike church, whatever. Now, bicycle helmets are kind of funny because they're very top of the head oriented. So when you hit the ground on a bike helmet, it's outside of your skull. It increases the lever force moving your head against your shoulders and your neck. And there is some evidence that the cervical damage, neck damage, from wearing a bike helmet is roughly equivalent to the safety increase you get from wearing a helmet and cranial damage. This is a design issue, but it doesn't, it's not, this is one of the reasons this is a bad analogy is because there's plenty of evidence, very good evidence, that the helmet itself will prevent cranial damage. Okay? Very good evidence. What there isn't is good evidence that the cost-benefit analysis of preventing cranial damage versus increased likelihood of cervical damage, especially in weaker populations, so women and children wearing helmets. The cost-benefit analysis is what is questionable, not do the bike helmets prevent cranial damage. This is a very important distinction for Dan to note. It doesn't seem important to him in the conversation, but it's a very important thing to note because it kind of destroys the analogy. Okay, the next part, when someone's making a case that tears through his assumptions, his natural instinct is to see how deep the tear actually goes, what common premises we're working from. Surgeons is not a dumb question. He says surgeons might have been a dumb question, but surgeons are not a dumb question. Surgeons are a very good question, and surgical masks do prevent gross contamination. Surgeons change their masks in the operating theater when they get wet or they get foggy or their faces start getting foggy or something. Okay, they turn around, they get a breath of fresh air, they get a new mask on. These things happen in the OR while the surgery is going on. It's not that the mask is there to prevent viral shed. Okay, just like you put on a gown, but you're not in a hazmat suit. Okay, you put on a gown to prevent lint falling off of your clothes into a wound. Okay, you're doing open heart surgery. Oh, hey, look, there's a lint ball in there. It'll be fine. No, this is why you wear gowns. This is the reason this stuff exists. There is a sterilization procedure. You obviously don't want it to be contaminated as much as possible, but asepsis is not a well-supported theory. Antisepsis is, but asepsis, the prevention of all viral bacteriological agents from being in a medical setting, it's not a well-supported idea. As a theory, theory. We'll use theory for this because it's like nursing theory, medical theory. Asepsis theory is not well supported by anything, except we like it, it looks good, it smells good, and it makes sense. That's the only thing you have supporting. It's not really supported by anything, okay? Gross contamination is a different story. And when we're dealing with surgeons and healthcare professionals, that's what we're dealing with for the most part. There's a study, came out of, I think, England. It's been black-holed. Most of the stuff that I'm talking about has been black-holed. It's very hard to actually get to, and I'm sorry about that, Dan. But there was a study, I think it was England, that showed, it was a fairly long study, that not wearing a mask in an OR operating room didn't have any negative impacts on health. And there was an odd, not hugely significant, like you could debate how significant, but there was an odd little effect where there were fewer post-op infections in the ORs that didn't wear the mask. And it's one of those things where there's too many possible confounders for me to say it's cleaner, but it's something that actually needs to be looked at because this stuff matters. Might have been more conscientiousness from the people in the OR because they're not wearing a mask. Just the same effect as people wear masks don't social distance or wash their hands as much as people who don't wear masks. Okay? This is pretty much all I've got with him. There's a huge thing here in this conversation that we could get into about social distancing, outdoor behaviors, exercise. We could go right back into the isolated human theory and start walking through it. But I don't need to do that right now. I've got 2 videos responding to Dan. Thank you, Dan, for being reasonably polite about this and allowing me to be a little aggressive without going over the top. But yes, I'm going to tear through all of your assumptions on mask wearing, and I'm going to start with the plague. Okay, stay sideways. Have a good one.